The night his wife became $500 million richer, she didn't hesitate. She looked Lawrence Wallace, her husband of 23 years, dead in the eyes and tossed him out like yesterday's leftovers. There he was, 52 years old, holding a black garbage bag, standing on the front steps of the home he'd paid for, staring back at the woman he thought he knew. For more than 2 decades, Lawrence was the guy you barely noticed because things just worked when he was around. He supervised the warehouse down in Columbus, always got there early, worked late, and somehow remembered to grab milk on the way home. Every single Friday, Lawrence stopped by Mattie's Mart on 5th and Granger. Picked the same 6 numbers, always. The numbers weren't random. His daughter's birthday, his mother's birthday, and the day he and Tina promised forever under a tree outside the courthouse in the spring of 2001. That Sunday, Lawrence opened his dresser drawer, as usual, to check the lottery ticket. Gone. Just gone. He found it, a chill running through his hands, 20 minutes later, locked tight in Tina's glove box. The ticket, his numbers, smashed up against a sleek little business card he'd never seen. Eric Donaldson, private wealth attorney. And below it, scribbled on notepaper, asset declaration strategy, sole claimant filing procedure, estimated post-tax lump sum, $311 million.
Tina didn't stumble on his ticket by chance. She'd been watching him play for years, waiting. Come Monday morning, Tina Wallace strode into the Ohio Lottery Claims Center, wrapped inside a $3,000 suit she probably bought that weekend. She claimed all $500 million for herself, just her, no Lawrence. By Wednesday, Lawrence found himself standing out on the porch with nothing but 2 hefty bags and an eviction notice signed by Eric Donaldson, the same silky attorney whose card was wedged next to his stolen ticket. Tina leaned in the doorway, giddy on the phone, barely glancing at him. She finally called out, "Go find somewhere to sleep, Lawrence. You should be used to being small by now." But Tina didn't know about the little receipt Lawrence had stuffed in his jacket pocket, a debit card charge from Mattie's Mart, time-stamped 6:14 p.m. Friday, the night he bought the ticket. That slip of paper was going to pull every last dollar right out from under Tina's perfectly polished shoes. And she really didn't know what kind of shock was waiting for her 3 weeks later when she strode into that courtroom next to her hotshot lawyer, laughing and confident. She barely glanced at the hollow-eyed man across the aisle, the one with the unshaved face and battered coat. She just looked away in pity, not realizing he was the man she'd tried to erase. Now, before I tell you what happened next, help me prove a point, will you? My mom said I'd never even get 1,000 subscribers, but I think stories like this matter. If you do too, hit like, subscribe, whatever you have to do. Let's show her these stories count. Now, let's see what happened next. Nobody ever saw Lawrence Wallace as the kind of guy who'd push back. Not really. He had shoulders wide as a barn door and thick, calloused hands that told the story of every single home improvement project he ever tackled. Gutters cleaned before the freeze, paint lines sharp in every room, and hours bent over the living room floor sanding and finishing until the boards glowed like honey under the lights. Home was what he built, by himself, with whatever tools he could afford at the time. He started at Meridian Logistics right after community college. No fancy credentials, no hookups, just a reputation for showing up early and leaving late. That's how he built things. Presence, sweat, routine. 21 years later, he was the boss on the floor. 63 people answered to him. He kept a perfect safety record, won Employee of the Year 4 years straight, and made a name by not losing his cool. Then there was Tina back when they met. Loan processor, quick as a whip, always laughing. The kind of quick that makes a man feel lucky just for being glanced at. They got married in 2001, scraped by those first years in a crummy Westerville apartment, splitting the grocery bill, eating off crooked, mismatched dishes. No handouts, just grit and a little hope. By 2010, they moved up to that 4-bedroom colonial on Clearwater Drive, a place that cost Lawrence more overtime and exhaustion than he could admit. He bought it with his paychecks, but honestly, he built it with his 2 hands, fixing, painting, making it theirs, piece by piece.
Tina was rising fast by then. She snagged a real estate license, opened her own tiny office, then started jetting off to networking events in faraway cities. At first, she came home with stories, later with expensive dresses, new opinions, and a look in her eye like every wall in their home was holding her back. He saw the changes, the new clothes, the subtle distance, the chilly notes in her voice, but said nothing, never one to make a scene. That was just Lawrence. He figured if he gave his all to something, took care of it quietly, it would last. Every Friday night, nearly like a prayer, Lawrence swung by Maddie's Mart on the corner. Same routine. Carl Mattison, the owner since forever, kept Lawrence's hand-scrawled lottery numbers taped behind the counter. They'd shoot the breeze for a few minutes. Buckeyes, Cleveland weather, Carl bragging about his grandkids. Lawrence would tuck his ticket into his shirt pocket, buy a gallon of milk, and head home, headlights sweeping across empty lawns. He played the same numbers, always. Each one mattered, a date, a memory, something carved into his heart. Chloe's birthday, 0417. His mom Ruth, 0823. His anniversary with Tina, 0512. They never hit, not once, not for 11 years. Then, out of nowhere, one Friday in March, every number landed, all 6. Lawrence didn't know. He was out cold, sleeping like anyone after a long week. By sunrise, as he reached for his ticket, it was gone. Someone else already pearled their fingers around a slip of paper that could buy a new life.
He didn't lose it. That was Lawrence, the kind of man who learned the hard way that panic gets you nowhere. You keep your face calm, even when your gut is spinning. Years on the warehouse floor taught him how expensive chaos can be. So he just stood there, outside in the early morning, looking at the white Lexus in the driveway, sun catching on the chrome. He knew what he had to do. No drama, just action. The glove compartment was unlocked. She'd gotten careless, maybe too sure of herself. You know how people start cutting corners when they've already decided the other person isn't worth the trouble. Inside the folder, his ticket. Carl always left his receipts clipped right on top, and sure enough, there was the one from Maddie's Mart. Eric Donaldson's business card sat wedged behind it. Then the notes. 3 thick pages, cramped handwriting on both sides, laying out each move for filing a lottery claim as the sole winner. Restructure all assets before starting divorce proceedings. Cut down on spousal claims by timing your separation right. Best move? File within 48 hours of claiming your prize. Lawrence went over every inch of it, not once, but twice. Then he pulled out his phone, snapped pictures of everything, put it all back just as he'd found it, walked into the kitchen and started a pot of coffee. Tina came downstairs about 40 minutes later, already dressed, makeup done, ready to go somewhere she hadn't bothered to mention. "Morning," she said. No eye contact, just grabbed her bag. "Morning," Lawrence replied. You wouldn't know it, but his voice barely had a ripple. He watched her as she snatched her keys, drove out to the Lexus, and drove away. He stood at the window until the car faded from view. Then he called David Castro.
David had been his roommate back in college before Lawrence bailed out and started working. David stuck with it, stubborn as ever, ground his way through law school, and now worked as a civil litigator in Dayton. His practice was nothing flashy, no glass-walled office or a mahogany desk, but he was sharp. He knew exactly how close someone could cut things when the person stealing from you knew you inside and out. Lawrence sent over the photos before David even picked up. "She already did research. She's mapped this out, Lawrence. This is a plan, not a whim," David said after a long stretch of silence. "I figured. You kept the original receipt? It's in my jacket. Don't lose that. Don't wash that jacket. Don't even let it out of your sight," David snapped. "Now get me 11 years of bank statements. Every Friday you stopped at that store, anything. I need it before she shows up to file, understand? He had every piece he needed. The receipt, serial number matched clean. Debit records, time-stamped down to the minute. Even Carl Mattison, who'd scribbled Lawrence's numbers on a sticky note behind that battered register for 11 years, stood by him. But there was one thing Lawrence didn't have left. Not anymore. Time. He was already racing against the clock, and he'd lost. 20 minutes ago, maybe he could have done something, but by Monday night, the Ohio Lottery Commission had already processed Tina Wallace's claim. She was now $500 million richer. Sole winner. She didn't call him, didn't come home, just sent a text. 3 words, no warmth at all. Check your email.
He opened it. Divorce papers. Emergency motion for the house, signed by Eric Donaldson's firm, stamped with Monday's date. The same morning Tina cashed in. She'd filed before the commission even printed her check. He read the motion, started over, still couldn't believe it. So he called David Castro, second time that day. "She moved faster than I expected," David said, a little strained. "How bad is it?" David paused, too long for comfort. "She wants the house for security reasons, says you've been erratic, threatening." Lawrence shook his head, even though nobody could see. "I've never even raised my voice at her, not once in 23 years. "I know, Lawrence, but now she's got $500 million and Eric Donaldson. We'll fight, but you should brace yourself." The emergency hearing dragged on for 40 minutes. Tina's attorney showed up like a small army, motions stacked, declarations, a whole story about Lawrence he'd never heard before. Volatile, unstable, the kind of man who turned ugly once his wife left him behind. Lawrence stood alone, represented himself. The judge made his ruling. Lawrence had 48 hours to get out. He barely knew the 2 officers who came by, but they tried to be kind. "Mr. Wallace, we have a court order. You need to vacate the premises." Lawrence didn't argue. No point.
He drifted from room to room, sweeping up what pieces of his life he could actually carry. 23 years, reduced to some battered tools. He built that deck himself. A shoebox with Chloe's old report cards, his mother's Bible. Whatever fit in the truck, that's what he kept. When everything was loaded, Tina appeared on the porch, sudden and cold. "You should have taken the settlement, Lawrence. Would have been cleaner," she called. He stopped, looked at her, really looked for the first time since that winning ticket, like seeing a stranger in his own house. Didn't say a thing, just turned, climbed in the truck, and drove away. If she thought this was winning, she had no idea what mistake she'd just made. She'd learn. Lawrence didn't sleep that night, not because he was broken, but because something sharper kept him up. He spent the darkness working. By 4 in the morning, he'd built a timeline. Every Friday purchase at Mattie's Mart for 11 years. Debit records, timestamps, always the same 6 numbers, bought at the same counter by the same tired man, swiping that same old card. $43,000 over 11 years, all documented. He called David Castro at 7 sharp. "I have everything," Lawrence said. David listened as Lawrence laid it all out. When he was done, David was quiet for a long time. Then, "Carl Mattison. We need Carl first."
Carl Mattison, 71, built like he'd never buckled in his entire life, did 2 tours in Vietnam, buried a wife, raised 3 daughters, ran that store through 2 economic punches and a flood. He remembered every regular, every small debt, every face.
He remembered Lawrence's numbers. Every Friday, 11 years, Carl said, not a hint of doubt. Same numbers, same time. I wrote 'em on a sticky note, stuck them behind the Marlboro Reds. He didn't even look, just pointed. That ticket's Lawrence's. I'll say it in any courtroom in Ohio. By noon, David had filed the legal challenge. Civil fraud, theft by deception, unjust enrichment, formal motion to contest Tina's claim with the Ohio Lottery Commission. He had the receipt, the records, Carl's sworn affidavit, and security footage from Mattie's, Lawrence at the counter, 6:14 p.m., before the draw. By 2, Tina's phone was blowing up. Thursday morning, a new player arrived, Raymond Porter. David hired him on contingency. The man had 22 years chasing financial crimes. If Tina hid the money, Porter would light it up. If Eric Donaldson advised her before she filed, he'd find that too. 4 days, that's all it took. And what Porter turned up didn't just confirm the theft. Tina thought she'd covered her tracks when she slipped into the Huntington branch and set up that secret account. 9 months before the numbers hit, she made little deposits here and there, keeping every transaction just under the radar. All those irregular amounts, just noise in the system, nothing flashy, nothing outrageous, as if invisibility was as simple as caution. She didn't just snatch Lawrence's ticket on a whim, she'd been preparing for this. The woman he loved had been sketching his erasure with every day and every dollar long before there was lottery money in play. As he sat there, figuring out his next move, the cracks in Tina's story had already started to show. The Lottery Commission's reply to David's complaint landed on a Tuesday. Standard language. Formal investigation opened. Claim under review. Disbursements? Done. Everything but that first chunk was frozen. Tina had already blasted through $6.2 million. $4.1 million gone on a mansion, paid in cash. Donaldson called it smart. Wrap it up, keep the paper clean, make it hard to trace. But Porter had it mapped out in 72 hours. 2 Mercedes, a Porsche in Donaldson's name, bought with Tina's money, high-end designer accounts at 3 Columbus boutiques. That Maldives escape, the one Tina paraded over her own Instagram, Porter didn't miss a post. He printed each one, timestamp, geotag, evidence, neat as pins. But text messages, that's where the domino started falling. Donaldson's phone, lazy with security, backed up to a wide-open cloud account. His password? His daughter's birthday. The guy never imagined his own hubris would be his undoing. What they found stopped David Castro cold. Tina to Donaldson nearly a year before the win. He buys the same numbers every Friday, has for years, sentimental, predictable. If they ever hit, I need to be the one holding that ticket. Donaldson didn't skip a beat. Then make sure you are, and make sure it's only your name on the claim. Yeah, 11 months ahead. This wasn't adrenaline or desperation. This was rehearsal. And once subpoenas started landing, Donaldson jumped ship. His lawyer was dialing David's number before traffic cleared for the evening. By morning, Donaldson was all in, anything for immunity. He spilled everything, the plot, the bank, the sequence, even whose brainchild it was to file for divorce the same day as the claim, or paint Lawrence as a threat in court papers. David practically had a confession written out for him. This thing Tina built, stone by borrowed stone, was about to be set back to its original foundation.
Everyone in Columbus was glued to the trial. You could feel the current in the air. Lawrence arrived first, quiet, unreadable, solid at the plaintiff's table. Tina glanced his way, but didn't register him as danger, not really. That was her last unforgivable error. David began. No melodrama. The facts spoke for themselves, solid as steel doors locking shut.
"Every dollar of that prize," he said, quiet, measured, "belongs to Lawrence Wallace. He earned it Friday by Friday for 11 years, and we'll prove that before we're done here." Carl, the clerk, backed him up. "Lawrence Wallace bought lottery tickets at my store, same time, same numbers, 11 years running. I kept his picks on a note behind my register. The winning ticket, that was his. I'd stake my store on it." Tina's attorney tried everything, a hail of questions, technicalities, marital property, possession. One by one, David set down fresh evidence. Each new document snuffed out resistance like a cold breeze through a candle. Then Tina took the stand. She lasted just 22 minutes. "Mrs. Wallace, you say you bought that ticket on impulse?" "Yes." "So why'd you research how to file a sole lottery claim 10 months before the winning draw?" She went quiet, looked for rescue from her attorney, who stared down and away. Judge Ellison sat with the evidence for 2 hours. When she returned, the courtroom stood up like a single body. "This court finds by clear and convincing evidence that Lawrence Wallace is the sole rightful owner of Ohio Lottery number 2024-291. The full prize and all assets purchased with those funds shall be recovered and returned immediately." Then they started dismantling Tina's empire. The $4.1 million mansion, instant receivership. The jewelry, barely used, boxed and sold through a local estate firm. Designer clothes, expensive furniture, even the Maldives trip, fraud recovery took care of that. The final audit didn't lie. Tina had just $9,400 left to her name, less than the price of that single handbag she'd indulged in the week after the verdict. Her family faded out fast. Her little sister, who danced at that glitzy housewarming, blocked her number in silence. Her mother picked up once and offered only 3 words, "You know better." Donaldson's immunity meant no charges stuck to him, but his life changed, his license suspended, his downtown office shuttered. He shuffled up to Akron, managing properties for someone else. Imagine a guy who helped plan a lottery heist reduced to collecting rent for another man. The DA let the case fade after 6 weeks, figuring public ruin and a civil judgment would sting harder than prison bars. Tina had years of repayments ahead, every last cent counted, checked, court-ordered. Carl Mattison, the man behind the register, refused the $50,000 Lawrence offered in thanks. He said, "You were always going to win, just buy something from the store." Lawrence walked back in and bought a Powerball ticket, same 6 numbers. 6 months after the dust settled, Lawrence made a move no one saw coming. He set up the Ruth Wallace Community Fund, named after his late mother, with $40 million to spearhead job training, apprenticeship programs, scholarships, anything that gave people tools to reshape their lives. Carpenters, mechanics, folks who built things got to build futures too. He kept his own life low-key, a simple 4-bedroom in Westerville. He spent his first weekend staining the floors himself, just old habit. And not once did he talk about Tina in public. One reporter asked what lesson he wanted people to learn. Lawrence took his time, then answered, "Being quiet isn't weakness, and patience, it's not just waiting for things to get better, it's building the case while everyone's sure you're finished." If you made it this far, you stayed with Lawrence till the last line. He earned that every second. So if this story hit you like it hit me, hit that like button, subscribe, and tell me where you're reading from. Let's keep telling the kinds of stories that never should have been silenced. See you next time.